Conference championship weekend is over, and with all of the crazy upsets and surprises this weekend, I'm going to give you the complete recap on every single conference from Big Ten to ACCs to the SoCon. So let's stop stalling and start talking wrestling. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name's Josiah, and welcome to Fanco Wrestling. On this show, we talk all about the latest going on in wrestling news, and of course, this is one of the most exciting times of the year, and this past weekend just proved that with all of the amazing matches that happened. Now, if you weren't able to watch this weekend, or you just aren't sure exactly what happened in every single conference, I'm going to give you the complete breakdown. I'm going into the Big Ten Championships recap, then I'm going to be talking about the biggest surprises from every conference championship, and finally I'm going to give you a breakdown on the 133-pound field going into the national tournament. It's going to be absolutely berserk at that weight, as well as every single other weight. So, without further ado, let's dive into some of the main topics of the day. And the first main topic: the Big Ten Championships were this past weekend, and they were absolutely bonkers. I mean, absolutely nuts. From upsets and in so many different weight classes, and not even just the championships, but from early rounds, you're talking early as first round to the quarterfinals, to the semis, so many crazy things that happened. So I'm going to go weight by weight, give you some of the crazy things that happened, as well as some of the championship recap. If you missed it, if you weren't able to watch it, or if you just want a reminder as what happened. So first of all, these are your Big Ten champions right here. Every single Big Ten champion, starting off at 125 with Spencer Lee. Spencer Lee absolutely dominated his way through this tournament this year, and this was actually his first ever Big Ten title, which is pretty insane to think about, that this is Spencer Lee, two-time national champion, but this is his first Big Ten title. It just shows the depth of this tournament. It's the toughest conference in the entire country, and it's because of that depth. Now, this year, Spencer Lee actually, he completely obliterated his way through the bracket, winning by fall, tech fall, and then major decision in the finals, beating Schroeder in the finals 16-2, almost a tech fall. But Schroeder did have an impressive tournament. He beat D'Agostino in the semifinals by a decision, but just something that I wanted to mention there. It was an impressive tournament for him in Spencer Lee, and it'll be interesting to see how he does, how all these guys do going into the national tournament next week. So, with that being said, let's move into the next weight at 133 pounds. And there's so much to unpack in this weight, let's be honest. From Sebastian Rivera to Roman Bravo Young, Seth Gross, and Austin DeSanto. What exactly happened here? Going on into the semifinals first are some of the matches you want to look at. You want to look at Sebastian Rivera versus Seth Gross. And this was a rematch from the Midland semifinals, whenever Seth Gross actually beat Sebastian Rivera. But Seabass turned things around this time, beat Seth Gross by a score of 7-6, an impressive victory, moving on to the finals, where he would face Roman Bravo Young, who just beat Austin DeSanto. Now, Austin DeSanto and actually Roman Bravo Young both kind of just squeaked out some wins in the quarterfinals. Austin DeSanto of Iowa defeating Ridge Lovett of Nebraska in the quarters, whereas Roman Bravo Young defeated Sammy Alvarez in the quarters of Rutgers. I mean, it was one of, if you have not seen that match in the quarterfinals, the last 30 seconds of that match was some of the most insane wrestling and insane scramble I've ever seen. Roman Bravo Young was running around the mat, doing flips, doing roll-throughs, and just trying to avoid getting taken down. Not that it really mattered because he was up by 3 points anyway, but that was the quarters. Then we move on to the semis. Austin DeSanto and Roman Bravo Young gave us a match. It was a 3-2 decision. Roman Bravo Young wasn't able to lock up that cradle like he did in the duel, but it was still an impressive victory. Then we move on to the finals with Sebastian Rivera and Roman Bravo Young. And although Roman Bravo Young did have a solid match against Rivera, he just wasn't able to quite get the points that he needed against him. And Sebastian Rivera won 7-2 in the finals, making him a two-time Big Ten champ, of course, beating Spencer Lee last year and Roman Bravo Young this year. This is a weight where I can see anything happening. at the national tournament. Don't be surprised if you see another order with all these different guys and going on into the national tournament at 141. And yes, there was a lot of time I spent talking at 133, but that's because that was the most insane weight of the weekend. But 141 was also an impressive weight. One of the biggest things that happened here, of course, Luke Pletcher won the bracket at 141 pounds, beating Nick Lee in the finals by a score of 6-5. He was able to turn the tide from the dual meet whenever Lee, to be honest, just kind of dominated Luke Pletcher in the duel. But, of course, Luke Pletcher went back in the room, fixed those mistakes, fixed those errors that he needed to work on, was a bit more defensive and offensive was, I think, the biggest thing. It was able to beat Nick Lee 6-5. The other big thing of this weight was Max Murin actually losing and not making it to the semifinals. He lost to Mitch McKee and Chad Red. Now, he was able to later avenge that loss against Mitch McKee when he was going for 5th and 6th. However, Chad Red is a guy that just looked solid this tournament, looked really, really good. He had a solid match against Nick Lee in the semis, but ultimately wasn't able to get the job done. And Nebraska is a team that Chad Red of Nebraska helped Nebraska have a solid Big Ten tournament, finishing in 2nd place overall. And we'll get the team scores in just a bit. But that's what happened at 141. So what happened at 149 pounds? Well, at 149 pounds, you had Pat Lugo defeating Sammy Sasso by a score of 2-1. Another close match, just like their duel was, that went into overtime. Now, Lugo had an impressive tournament. He was a bit more offensive than Sammy Sasso, just like he was in the duel. That's just kind of the type of wrestlers that they are. Sammy Sasso a bit more defensive, but he beat him by a score of 2-1. Now, talking about some of the earlier matchups too, Brayton Lee is a guy that people have been looking out for in this bracket. Brayton Lee of Minnesota. Pat Lugo was able to beat him by a score of 4-1. Another thing that happened in this bracket, you look at a Jared Verclaren. Some people are wondering, what happened with Penn State? What's going on here? Jared Verclaren didn't have the best tournament. He's a guy who I believe was in contention to do really well at the Big Ten. He was really coming into his own, peaking at this point in the season, but just didn't quite have the Big Ten tournament everybody expected him to have. He was beat in an early round by Yaya Thomas of Northwestern, defeated him. Ended up placing above him, I believe it was in the end. However, Verclaren just wasn't able to pull out anything crazy. A guy who had a very impressive tournament as well was Colin Puritan of Nebraska, who beat Kanan Storr in the Conci semis and then beat Brayton Lee to give him a high placing in the Big Ten bracket at 149 pounds. Now, moving on to 157 pounds. What was the deal at 157? This was really Ryan Deacon's weight. Deacon of Northwestern, absolutely, he crushed his way through the bracket. He's been a clear favorite ever since the Cliff Keen Las Vegas tournament earlier in the season. But Ryan Deacon ended up beating Kendall Coleman in the finals by a score of 7-2, a very sound victory. Going up to that point, other things in the bracket to discuss. I don't think... I think Deacon's going to be a big threat at Nationals, but the one thing that I wanted to talk about at 157 was Caleb Young of Iowa losing out, going 0-2, not even placing, not even having, he just did not have a good tournament at Big Tens. You want to talk about Jared Verclaren at the weight before, well, Caleb Young for Iowa at this weight just didn't quite have the tournament everybody expected him to have, coming in as one of the top seeds. First of all, losing to Peyton Robb of Nebraska. Like I said, Nebraska just had an impressive team tournament, and him defeating Caleb Young was just one part of that. The other thing now is Robb beat Barone. Barone was another guy who beat Caleb Young, and then Peyton Robb ended up beating Barone for 3rd and 4th, ended up beating him later on in the tournament and had just an impressive run. Going on to 165 pounds, the two big guys here, let's be honest, are Vincenzo and Marinelli. The third guy I want to mention is Evan Wick. Evan Wick actually medical forfeited out of the tournament and after the first match, and so he medical forfeited. He will end up getting a qualifying spot at Nationals, but just medical forfeited out of the tournament, kind of questioning, how I'm just wondering how hurt he is and hope he's doing all right so we see him do well at Nationals. The other guy here, Isaiah White of Nebraska, of course, having another, an impressive run for the team. But Vincenzo and Marinelli, oh my gosh, what a match. That had to be one of my favorite matches to watch just because of these two. I mean, just going upper body with each other, over and under hooks, and just really, just throwing each other around, rolling with each other on the mat, just going all the way around the mat. And these over and unders, throwing each other, and ended up not getting any of those throws, which was the crazy part. No points scored off of those throws. It ended up being Alex Marinelli's single that won the match for him in the last 10 seconds, probably 10, 15 seconds of the match, which was bonkers to see Marinelli and Vincenzo. That ended up by a score of 3-2 was the final score of that match. Absolutely insane. Then we move on to 174 pounds. 174 was Mark Hall and Michael Kemmer. And if I think I just failed to mention, Alex Marinelli was the one who beat Vincenzo in that last match, making him a Big Ten champion. And Vincenzo he will never win a Big Ten title, which is unfortunate for him, but he still has a chance at a national title. Now, moving on to 174 in Mark Hall and Michael Kemmer. This score was another match that was reversed, another upset, if you want to call it, based on rankings, based on seeds. Mark Hall beat Michael Kemmer this time by a score of 8-5. Beat him by a score of 8-5. And I will say that Michael Kemmer, for the most part, had a little bit more impressive of a tournament. Kemmer up to the finals, he had a fall, a major Skatska, and then, while on the other side, Hall, well, he wrestled well in the early rounds with a tech fall over Gunther, and then he had a 5-4 decision over Dylan Leidy of Purdue. That was, it was a close match, and this is a match, you see these guys wrestle so many times throughout the year that, a lot of these guys are going to be closing that gap, and this was kind of a case of that with Dylan Leidy and Mark Hall. But Mark Hall, on the other hand, completely turned the tide against Michael Kemmer, was dominating him for the most part in the first two periods. Then in the third period, you see Kemmer start coming back. Mark Hall wasn't looking quite the wrestler that he was in the third period, and Kemmer took advantage of that and ended up coming back. I believe Hall was up like 7-1, 7-2 going into the third period, just was not able to hold on to that lead, making this a match to look forward to at the national tournament. This is a match I'm 100% looking forward to watching. Now you want to talk about another impressive Penn State wrestler. That's at 184 pounds, looking at Aaron Brooks, who had a standout tournament. One of my favorite favorite guys to watch in this tournament, just because I wasn't sure how he was going to do. Now, he was the number one seed at this tournament, and the Big Ten actually isn't necessarily the way to talk about when it comes to 184 pounds. It wasn't the strongest bracket. You have some solid guys in the bracket, but not the strongest bracket at 184 compared to like the ACC at 184 pounds that has Hidley, Bolin, and Bonacorsi. However, all these Big Ten guys are going to be guys to look out for at 184 at the national tournament. Starting off with Aaron Brooks, who won by a score of 3-2 in the finals against Cam Caffey of Michigan State. Caffey, wow, he's had a standout year, kind of came out of nowhere from the beginning of the year up until this point, and he's just wrestled very impressively, made it to the finals. He beat Abe Assad in the semifinals, Assad of Iowa. Now, Caffey, the great thing about this weight, I think, especially here at 184, is that it's a very young weight. You look at Aaron Brooks, who's a true freshman. You look at Abe Assad, who is another freshman, and even a Rocky Jordan, who finished in 5th place, wasn't in the finals or anything, but 5th place finish for the freshman is impressive. Other guys to look out for here are Taylor Venz of Nebraska. Venz, okay, beat Aaron Brooks just about a month ago in the dual meet, but Aaron Brooks was able to turn that and pin Venz in the semifinals. Absolutely, stunned me. That I was blown away whenever I saw that. Whenever he pinned Venz, that was a match to watch. And then Venz did end up avenging that loss he had to Abe Assad from earlier in the year for the 3rd and 4th place match, and ended up taking 3rd. But this was an impressive weight for a couple of these guys. Then you look to another great weight, and another great guy at 197 in Colin Moore. Colin Moore just had a very sound weekend of wrestling. A very sound weekend of wrestling, defeating Eric Schultz of Nebraska, one of the I believe the only guy of Nebraska. Yes, in the finals was Eric Schultz. Colin Moore beat him by a score of 4-1. Up until that point, Colin Moore had a major decision, and then a decision in the finals. The other things going on at 197 are Shakur Rasheed. Shakur Rasheed is back at 197 now. A very solid weekend, defeating Jacob Warner in one of the early rounds, which stunned a lot of people, including myself, just because Shaq, with his injury, just didn't look to be the wrestler that he was in the past. But he wrestled very well this tournament, was actually offensive going into the semifinals whenever he did end up losing to Schultz in the semis by a score of 4-3, which I think that is a match that can be tossed up again. Now, unfortunately, Shakur Rasheed did have to injury default out of the tournament once he got into the third and fourth place match against Jacob Warner. Warner was beating him up until that point. However, Shaq kind of tweaked his, I believe it was his knee again, and ended up injury defaulting out of the tournament. But an impressive weekend for Colin Moore. And then you want to talk about heavyweight. Heavyweight, of course, at the last weight before I get into the team scores, is wow. A great way to end the night with Gable Steveson and Mason Paris. This ended with Gable Steveson winning by a score of 8-6 in the finals. Was a little bit more offensive, a little bit more aggressive than Mason Paris. However, the one thing I do want to say is that I believe it was the second period when Mason Paris was in deep on a shot on Gable, ended up taking him to his back, and he was stuck if the time wasn't out. Now, rewatching that a little bit, yes, Mason Paris did take him over. I think Gable Steveson may have known it was kind of towards the end of the period and kind of let loose a little bit. But I'm just saying that it's completely capable that Mason Paris could beat Steveson. However, Gable Steveson was the aggressor in this match, in this tournament, was Gable Steveson. Now, up until this point, Steveson beat Cassiope again. He beat him by a score of 9-4 this time. Not quite the major decision before, but a 9-4 decision. And on the other side, Paris over Hilger by a score of 4-0 in the semifinals. Hilger and Cassiope both ended up wrestling again, where Cassiope beat Hilger. Cassiope, of course, of Iowa. Iowa's heavyweight. And then you look at Jensen, who's from Nebraska, took 5th. Gary Traub of Ohio State, 6th. And then the other guy I want to talk about here is Seth Nevels of Penn State, who injury defaulted out of the first match, ended up tweaking his leg, which was very unfortunate to see. And it's just not what you want to see, is guys actually getting hurt and being injured. And that's kind of what played into the detriment of Penn State taking 4th place. Is one, you want to talk about Jared Verclaren, didn't necessarily have the tournament that he wanted to have. Then, Shakur actually had he overperformed this tournament. He did end up injury defaulting for 3rd and 4th. And then Seth Nevels not quite able to pull anything out because he injury defaulted out of both of his matches. Now, the one thing here, although Penn State did take 4th place with 107 points, they did have the most finalists, and I think they have the best finalist potential going into the NCAAs. Iowa now did have the most champions, although not the most finalists, most champions, with Spencer Lee, with Pat Lugo, Alex Marinelli, all winning championships. And then Nebraska, Iowa won with 157.5 points. Nebraska took 2nd with 132 points. Like I said, they just had consistent guys. Ohio State taking 3rd with 112. Penn State in 4th with 107 points, and Purdue taking 5th, rounding out the top 5 with 83 points. This was an impressive weekend. It was one of my favorite tournaments to watch. Please let me know in the comments below what your favorite match was and how you think everybody's going to do at the national tournament. Now, let's move on. To the biggest surprises from Conference Championship weekend. What were some of the biggest surprises from this past weekend at the Conference Championships? Talking about Big Tens, Pac-12s, SoCons, ACCs, every single Conference Championship, Big 12s. What happened? What are the things that you need to know? First of all, let's start off with the Big Ten Championships. Starting off at the Big Ten Championships, I just want to say that there were crazy upsets. absolutely crazy upsets from all around. And if you want to see some of like everything Big Ten championship recap, make sure you check that video out on the channel. But I want to talk about some of the crazy upsets at the Big Tens. We want to talk about 133 just in general. Is Sebastian Rivera beating Seth Gross in the semifinals. Coming in at the number 5 seed was Rivera, but he beat Seth Gross in the semis, then beat Roman Bravo Young in the finals. An impressive victory all around. That way it was just bonkers. Talking about 141, you see this guy right here in Luke Pletcher defeating Nick Lee in the finals. Was an impressive victory. Beat him by a score of 6-5, turning the tide from before. Looking at 149, Lugo defeating Sasso. 165, Alex Marinelli over Vincenzo Joseph. So many crazy things that happened. And then Mark Hall, of course, turning that match around and defeating Michael Kemmerer, being a little bit more aggressive up until the third period. And then really a couple of these other weights just solidifying guys as the number 1 seeds in their weights. Looking at Gable Steveson over Paris and then Aaron Brooks over Caffey. Just so many great upsets. And then I'll get to Caleb Young in just a minute. That was, of course, one of the other unfortunate upsets for the Iowa Hawkeyes. However, it was just an insane weekend. The other thing I want that you need to know is about Nebraska. Nebraska finishing second place in the Big Ten to Iowa. Iowa, of course, having 157.5 points as the first place as your Big Ten champions, but Nebraska finishing in second place with 132 points over the third place, Ohio State. And yes, that's correct. Penn State finished in fourth place with 107. So Nebraska is a team that I want to discuss here because while they had no champions, actually, which makes this even more impressive. They had no champs, but they did have one finalist, Eric Schultz, at 197 pounds, who lost to Colin Moore in the finals. Nebraska was just a very consistent team. A lot of third places. Looking at Chad Redd, who had a great win over Max Murin of Iowa. Peyton Robb, who upset Caleb Young in an early round. Colin Puritan, Isaiah White, as well as Taylor Vance, who avenged a earlier season loss from Abe Assad. All these guys taking third place. Then you look at Ridge Lovett, who gave Austin DeSanto a match in the quarterfinals. I believe it was a 1-0 decision that he lost. However, an impressive tournament, ended up taking 7th place. Alex Thompson took 6th. Mikey Labriola at 197 took 6th, and David Jensen at heavyweight took 5th place. That was a big surprise from this weekend. At least I didn't see it coming. Please let me know in the comments below. Did you see Nebraska finishing in 2nd place? Maybe if you're a Nebraska fan, you did, and I'll give you props for that because they had an impressive weekend. Now, the other thing, the other surprise before we get into the ACC, EIWA, and a couple of these other conference championships, the last thing with Big Ten is that Iowa didn't place all 10 wrestlers and may not be a lock at the national championship. Now, yes, they had a heck of a tournament, okay? For the most part, they dominated most other teams. Yes, Nebraska was knocking on the door a little bit, not quite there, but they dominated for the most part. Now, a couple of the guys that didn't quite perform to their seeds, to how they were supposed to perform, Caleb Young going 0-2, I already mentioned, losing to Peyton Robb and then Barone of Illinois. 2 losses. Unfortunate to see a Caleb Young perform that way. But then Max Murin, the other guy at 141, who we expected, we were excited to see how's he going to do against Luke Pletcher or Nick Lee since he hadn't wrestled yet. Well, he didn't even get a chance to wrestle them because he lost early on to Mitch McKee and then Chad Redd. So that was, unfortunate to see out of Max Murin. But just saying, they didn't place all 10 of the wrestlers, which everybody expected. Everybody was saying that was the chatter. Is I was going to place all 10 wrestlers. I was going to have 10 champions. I mean, I don't think anybody necessarily expects Iowa to have 10 champions. To have 10 champions is absolutely unheard of, but to place all 10 wrestlers is impressive. Now, they may not be a lock, but they did have an impressive tournament, and I think once we see it nationals, that's going to be even tougher for them overall. Looking at the ACC now, transitioning into the ACC, a couple of big things here in Jack Mueller losing to Jacob Camacho of NC State. Camacho, of course, and Jack Mueller at 125 pounds. Jack Mueller lost by a score of 11-4 to Camacho. Camacho, a young wrestler, to Jack Mueller, who's coming into this season in this tournament undefeated. Camacho upended him and making him an All-American threat. This is going to be an impressive way to watch at the national tournament with Spencer Lee at the top, but then Jack Mueller, who made it to the finals last year against Spencer Lee. Of course, you also have guys like Pat Glory. It's a crowded weight at the top, and Camacho just proved himself capable of pulling off an upset like this. Nick Piccinini, another guy at this weight. That's the other name I was thinking of. But a couple other things at the ACC tournament that you should know about. Hunter Boland defeated Trent Hidley in the finals. Before Hidley and Nino Bonacorsi were in the semis. This is a weight I was really excited to see how this shook out at the ACCs, because 184 was arguably the toughest weight at the ACC championships. Hunter Boland of Virginia Tech ended up on top, defeating Trent Hidley of NC State in the finals. A couple other things at this weight. Zach Sherman of UNC upended Tariq Wilson at 141, which was an upset from that tournament because he lost to him earlier in the season in the duel, and Zach Sherman ended up getting that victory back at the ACC championships. And then 165 was another impressive weight when Jake Wenzel defeated Kennedy Monday and then David McFadden. Jake Wenzel of Pitt wasn't necessarily a favorite to win this tournament by any means. However, we've seen Kennedy Monday with some impressive upsets this season, including beating David McFadden. And then David McFadden, a former high placer, at tournaments in the past, and Jake Wenzel ended up beating him. Great tournament overall for Jake Wenzel, and somebody to look out for at the NCAAs. Looking at the EIWAs now, a couple other surprises from here. Now, Kolodzik, well, it wasn't necessarily a surprise that he won. It was a surprise that he had a couple of close matches. Couple of close wins, 4-3. Then he beat Keyshawn Clark 6-0. Keyshawn Clark of American, and 6-4 over Jared Prince of Navy. Couple of close losses. I think people expected him to dominate just a little bit more. Kolodzik is a threat for a national title, and this is a weight, at 149 that there are some tough guys here, and it's going to be tough for Kolodzik. But I think he's still a threat, EIWA champion, and then. The other thing here, Lehigh winning the EIWA championships. This is a weight that's kind of been crazy this year with Cornell, Lehigh, Princeton. It's been all over the place with this conference. So that was the EIWA. Looking forward to the Pac-12. What happened at the Pac-12 championships? The biggest surprise, Zahid Valencia did not wrestle. This was unfortunate. I did a whole video on why Zahid is not wrestling. He's indefinitely suspended from the year due to certain problems, which is unfortunate to see his career end this way. Seeing him, not in the Pac-12 just solidifies that now 184 is completely open. It's a completely open weight class now, and it's unfortunate to see Zahid, two-time former national champion, now not wrestle this year. The other thing happening at the Pac-12, Arizona State did have 5 champions, but the one guy I want to mention from Stanford is Shane Griffith. Of course, him and Real Woods, both of Stanford, won the Pac-12 championships. Real Woods at 141, and Shane, who gave Pletcher a match earlier in the year, and Shane Griffith, the freshman, remains undefeated and moves into 165 pounds as an undefeated wrestler so far at this point in the season. I'm pumped to see how he's going to do against guys like Vincenzo Joseph and Alex Marinelli. We've seen freshmen come in the past like Micaiah Lewis and have an impressive run at NCAAs. Could Shane Griffith do it this year? And the last thing I want to talk about, I want to mention at least Max and Big 12s. There weren't necessarily anything crazy that happened at either of these tournaments. So I just wanted to mention that it's not any surprises there that happened. If you disagree, if you think that there were a couple of surprises, please let me know in the comments below. But the last thing I do want to talk about is the SoCon championships. I mentioned already 5 champions from Arizona State in the Pac-12. Well, Campbell University had 5 champions in the SoCon, making those the 2 top teams to have the most champions out of any single weight class. impressively, Campbell actually could have had 6 champions. The only reason they didn't is Jerry Hino, the heavyweight, actually lost to Kerry Miller of App State, which was a surprise at the heavyweight championships. And that's kind of what happened there. But Campbell wins back-to-back SoCon championships. And those are all of the surprises that happened this weekend at the conference championships. Please let me know what your favorite surprise was from this past weekend. Now, let's move on to the third topic. Let's help you understand the crowded field at 133 pounds. And yes, it is absolutely crowded. I mean, from the top to the bottom, just so many impressive wrestlers at 133 pounds. And that was solidified after the conference championship weekends, where we saw already a couple of upsets and a couple of insane berserk matches that could have gone either way. First off, let's start off at the top at 133 pounds. At 133 pounds, or at the top at number 1, is Sebastian Rivera. Seabass, as they call him, is now a 2-time Big Ten champion and a 2-time All-American who this season, and I'm going to talk about how they did against some of the other competition, as well as how they could do at the national tournament. Sebastian Rivera, of course, lost to Seth Gross earlier on in this season at the Midlands Championships. He lost in the semifinals. He was beating him, and that's why I thought Sebastian Rivera had a good chance to win the Big Ten Championships, is because he wrestled Seth Gross really well before he ended up losing, getting tossed by Seth Gross. But that's just something that's in Seth Gross's arsenal that he has. And I'll get to him in just a second. Now, he beat him in the Big Ten semis and then went on to defeat Roman Bravo Young in the finals. Those two have not wrestled up until that point. And, of course, now Roman Bravo Young has a little bit more in the arsenal where he's going to be able to come back and train in the room and see what he's going to have to do to defeat Sebastian Rivera. But Sebastian Rivera is not somebody to overlook. He beat Spencer Lee last year twice. Didn't end up getting to wrestle him at the national tournament because he was defeated. But now he's moving up a weight class at 133. I'm interested to see how he does at the weight class because he looked very, very strong this past weekend. The next guy is Roman Bravo Young. He was an All-American last year, and surprisingly, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, he actually took 8th place at the national championships last year. I see him doing better this year, just in my opinion. But like you said, this is a crowded weight class. You never know what could happen. First off, in the quarterfinals, he had an insane match with Sammy Alvarez. He was defeating him pretty soundly until the last 30 seconds. If you haven't checked out that last 30 seconds of their scramble, when Roman Bravo Young is just like running around the mat and rolling around and trying to avoid being taken down, whoa! I mean, it was like a track meet is what it was. But he did end up losing to Sebastian Rivera in the finals. As I said, he defeated DeSanto in the semifinals by a close decision. I believe it was 3-2, but he did end up defeating DeSanto after what was a controversial earlier season match whenever they wrestled in the Penn State and Iowa duel, when Roman Bravo Young took DeSanto over to his back twice in a cradle. Didn't quite log up the cradle this time at the Big Ten Championships, but it's something where, this is a little triangle going on where, DeSanto beat him in the past, and you never know what could happen at the national tournament. Moving on is Seth Gross. Seth Gross, an impressive tournament. In the past, Seth Gross, if you didn't know, he's actually a 2-time finalist, as well as a national champion in 2018. Injured last year, ended up transferring schools to Wisconsin, and now he's looking forward to another national championship this year. Now, this season so far, he has wins over Roman Bravo Young and over Austin DeSanto. He had another win against Austin DeSanto this weekend for the 3rd and 4th place match, but he did end up losing to Sebastian Rivera in the semifinals. Now, Seth Gross is somebody who has a lot in his arsenal. He has those, as I said, he has that lat drop that he's able to hit kind of out of nowhere and come back and get those 6 points to come back in a match. He also has He's also a very defensive wrestler. We've seen where he was beating guys early on in the match, but is able to hold on because he's a defensive wrestler. And I think that's what makes him a real threat, that he can score from just about anywhere. And I'm excited to see how he does at the national tournament. Moving on to Austin DeSanto. Austin DeSanto is he's a crazy guy to watch wrestle, but an exciting guy to watch wrestle. And that's because he is a great wrestler. This season, he does have a win early in the season to Seth Gross towards the beginning of the year. Now, since then, he's actually lost to Gross twice. He lost to him in the Midlands finals, where he did lose, he ended up giving up some back points, and he did end up losing to him in the Big Ten Conci finals for third and fourth place. Now, as far as the other guys in the bracket, he does have a win over Roman Bravo Young, who's sitting towards the top of the NCAA seeding. But Austin DeSanto does have a win over him in the past, although he has lost him this year. So he's capable of defeating him, and I wouldn't be all that crazy surprised. The couple other guys I want to mention at 133 pounds in the Big Ten before we move on to some of the other conferences are Travis Petrosky, who beat Joey Silva in the Conci semis. Petrosky of Illinois gave DeSanto a bout at the Big Ten Championships, as well as defeated Sammy Alvarez for 5th and 6th place. And, of course, Sammy Alvarez is another guy I want to mention just because, like I said, he had that crazy scramble, crazy end of the match with Roman Bravo Young and is a threat to, potentially All-American at this weight class. Sammy Alvarez of Rutgers, and it would be great for Rutgers to have this. He's a young guy, but moving forward into the future, it's going to be interesting to see how he does this year because Rutgers is a growing team and he's a young team for the most part. Now, a couple of these other conferences, a couple of these guys in these other conferences. The first guy I want to mention is Chaz Tucker. Tucker, maybe you know him, maybe you don't. He's undefeated this year. He's 31-0. Now a 3-time national qualifier, although he is not All-American, and this could be his year. This year so far, he wins over Jarrett Trombley of NC State, over Montori Bridges of Wyoming, over Todd Small, and Sammy Alvarez. Now, in the past, this year he's been a complete threat, and I think he is a threat coming into this tournament undefeated. Now, did he wrestle the amount of competition as the Big Ten? Maybe not. However, he's undefeated, and that's not something to scoff at. In the past, he has wrestled Roman Bravo Young at the national championships. He actually lost to him by a score of 6-3, but it's a new year, and we'll see how he does at nationals this year. The next guy I want to talk about is somebody from the ACC, and Mickey Philippi, a 2-time ACC champ now. National qualifier last year as well as this year, obviously, but last year made the round of 12. He ended up losing to Luke Pletcher and Roman Bravo Young, both last year at the national tournament. Of course, Pletcher's up a weight now, but Roman Bravo Young is still there. This season so far, he wins over Noah Gonzer, who I will get to next, Gonzer of Campbell. Wins over Jarrett Trombley, Reese Whitcraft of Okie State, as well as a win over Travis Petrosky, which was one of the first tournaments of the year where he had that win. Petrosky of Illinois, who I already mentioned from the Big Ten. So Philippi is a guy I believe that you should be watching out for. Next up is Noah Gonzer of Campbell. He is a threat to All-American this year for sure. He gave Mickey Philippi a match, one of the first matches of the season and the first duel of the season. Now he just won SoCon championships. It's his first SoCon title, but he's now a 3-time national qualifier. His previous qualifying status, last year he qualified, and before that he actually qualified at Eastern Michigan before that program unfortunately shut down. This season, he has a win over Tim Rooney of Kent State, beat him at the Navy Classic. Like I said, he had a close match with Mickey Philippi and a win over Taylor Lamont, who is another top-ranked guy in this weight. He has had close matches so far this season. One of his most impressive matches to me wasn't necessarily that Philippi match. It was actually the Sebastian Rivera match that I watched at the Midlands Championships. Whenever he did lose to him, but he took him down, showing that he's right there with those top guys. He took him down and had a close match with him, as well as with Travis Petrosky. Now, a couple other guys that I want to mention. First off is Cameron Sakura of North Dakota State, is now a 4-time national qualifier and a senior. The senior out of North Dakota State is a threat to All-American again. Not again, but for the first time, This weekend, he had a win over Montori Bridges at the Big 12 Wrestling Championships, which was a great victory for Cameron Sakura of North Dakota State. It'd be great to see North Dakota State get somebody on the map and really get a All-American there. And a couple other guys are Montorie Bridges of Wyoming, who's 32-6 on the season, has an impressive record from Wyoming. He's a former All-American in 2018, made the round of 16 last year, did not All-American, but is somebody who's right there with a lot of these top guys. He has a wins over Ridge Lovett so far this year, who gave, like I said, he gave Austin DeSanto a match at the Big Ten Championships, but he does have a win over Ridge Lovett, who's wrestled a great Big Ten tournament. Another guy, one of the last guys I want to mention, is Devin Turner, who's a Pac-12 champ and now a two-time national qualifier. He's another guy who's a win over Ridge Lovett of Nebraska. And I'm mentioning a couple of these Big Ten guys, them beating Big Ten guys, because there's a lot of depth at the Big Ten Championships, and we see a lot of upsets at the Big Ten Championships. And so when anybody can get a win over these guys, Devin Turner beating Ridge Lovett, it's impressive. And like I said, Lovett had a match with DeSanto at Big Ten, so he's a threat right there. Close matches this season Devin Turner's had with Montorie Bridges and Noah Gonzer. So he's right there with a lot of these top guys too. These are some of the most impressive guys at 133 pounds. Could we see anybody else come in? You please let me know. I hope that you understand the crowded field now at 133 pounds, what's at stake, who beat who, and what we could see at the national championships. Now, guys, that is going to do it for the Fanco Wrestling Show this week. There's a lot to talk about in the future over the upcoming week, talking about seeding, talking about brackets coming out this week, and so many other things, as well as national champion predictions. All of that is going to be coming up in videos this week. So if you're not already subscribed to this channel, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, because there is so much to talk about this upcoming week, and I am so pumped. Until next time, guys, talk to you then.